company covering everything. I'm talking that news you ain't heard of, cause you know it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Fucking politics that the corporate news won't cover. You know they don't think that you could see under, but you can now, cause the people we cover, I mean not, but the story should be heard. Yeah, every voice matters. We should rise and fall together, and that's why.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. Still the preceding days up to our freedom holidays, and as of today, we're going to lose our lovely co-host here, Andy Kennedy, to Canada Day. So thank you, Andy, for taking time out this morning of your holiday festivities to join us.
Oh, I'm happy to. And you know, it's not all me. We can't get into the trailer park campsite area until 2. So,
So yay! It worked out.
It's not out of the goodness out of my heart. It's like, you know, I got nothing else to do right now, so I might as well be here.
I've got nothing better to do, which is what most of our audience says anyway. I've got nothing better.
I can't disappoint our tens and tens of viewers.
That's exactly right. So for those of you who are tuning in, we see you and feel free to jump into the conversation. Most of the chats we can see, not all of them. So if you're joining on Periscope or on our Facebook page, we do see those comments. So, yeah, let them rip. We'll address them. We'll answer them. Join that conversation. And we have a lot to talk about today. So let's get right into it. Election recap. Let's start there. First is with Kentucky and the surprise come from behind win for Miss McGrath there. She beat out Booker by a really narrow margin. And it stands to reason. She had $40 million and Booker had not any of that. But what was interesting is these last few minute totals and what happened. Apparently there are 6,000 ballots, mail-in ballots, that were thrown out. Right. And all of them for Mr. Booker. And then some new ballots or some new totals magically came in. So I could rant about it, but I happened to watch Kit Cabello on Hard Lens last night. They did their last show in their immediate setup. So Hard Lens is another one of the independent media groups that is going completely independent because we know that certain social media networks like to censor and limit and throttle independent media getting exposure, and they, you know, let's be honest. These big networks are taking money from the traditional corporate-owned networks and advertising dollars. So they like to limit what you hear and see from independent media. So obviously, we're not good with that. And Hard Lens Media took what I feel is a necessary and vital step of going independent. So last night was their last broadcast on their medium, but this particular piece from Hard Lens I thought was just beautiful, and kudos to you, Kit, for this little rant. So I did pull it down, and we have the link to their entire broadcast on our Facebook page, and we'll post it here again so you can see everything that they were talking about and the good work that Hard Lens is doing. So let me go ahead and put that up here real quick.
Kentucky. I even asked this question on Twitter. Do we live in a democracy? I mean, yes, no. Answer my questions, guys. I mean, seriously. I'm legitimately asking a question. Do we live in a democracy? Because
Hard Lens, it's not.
I don't believe it. I don't, because, you know, we've seen so many examples of election fraud, the DNC weighing in, rigging primaries, but the media and everyone else is reporting that Charles Booker lost, which I don't believe, but lost the primary race against Amy McGrath, and now Amy McGrath is going forward into the general election, who will be going up against Turtle Boy, Mitch McConnell. And the last time I checked, every time the Democrats kind of ran like a centrist, pragmatic, neoliberal Democrat, they've always lost. Now, maybe things might be different. Maybe. I'm being generous here. Maybe I'm being a little bit too generous, but hear me out. Maybe she could potentially beat Mitch McConnell. But there's something fundamentally wrong here. There's something that happened in Kentucky. But what everyone's failing to realize is that a lot of those votes, especially most notably, apparently 6,000 votes, miraculously disappeared for Charles Booker. And somehow other votes were added in for Amy McGrath. Now, I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying that the DNC, which it's normally known for doing in primaries, is rigging an election against a very popular state senator in the state of Kentucky. I'm not saying that the DNC is trying to basically crash the progressive movement that is gaining a lot of momentum. I'm not saying that, but it just looks obviously very suspicious that somehow now, out of a weird left field move, the DNC establishment candidate won.
So that was Kit and Heartlands Media, for those just tuning in. And I think the short rant that Kit went on kind of encapsulates how everybody's feeling. How the hell did this happen? Right? And especially when we're looking at Louisville, Kentucky, where you had one polling place open to service 600,000 people. How do we call that an election? How do we call that an election in a democratic process? I don't think you can. And this is part of where I have been pushing back, especially on the blue MAGA folks, the vote blue no matter who have come out in droves now. You better fall in line. And I'm like, this is gaslighting. And I was originally going to put together a segment on what gaslighting is, but we've gotten such a good education over the last 3.5, 4 years of gaslighting from the White House that I would think that people are well versed on what that is. But taking the context of this primary election, Iowa happened. We saw what happened in Iowa. We saw the chair of the Democratic Party resign. We saw that colossal mess. And then it just kept happening from state to state to state. And then COVID hit. And now we have the ultimate poll tax, which is risking your own life to vote in America. So we're not talking about a war-torn country where you might die by trying to vote. We're talking about the United States. So this goes beyond voter suppression. This goes beyond curtailing the Voting Rights Act. This is quite literally, you have people dying because they tried to exercise their right to vote. And everybody's pretending that this is totally okay in a democratic process, and it's not. I mean, I was personally affected because here in Illinois, and I got into a little bit of an argument with a blue MAGA person. And she was arguing, yay, JB did a wonderful job and he's handling COVID. And I'm like, wait, he could have made 2 phone calls and delayed the primary here in Illinois, and he chose not to. And don't act like the other governors who did delay the primary, there were 20 other, they don't have super magic powers that our own governor didn't have. And oh, by the way, we have poll workers who are dead now. And we had a spike that occurred afterwards our election. I had my right to vote taken away because I ended up getting COVID after the deadline for requesting a mail-in ballot. So my choice was go to the poll and risk other people, my neighbors, or stay home and lose my right to vote. So I chose to stay home. And because of that, I lost my right to vote, but that was my personal poll tax. So this is happening exponentially state across state across state. And in Louisville, how many people were at risk for trying to vote? And yet here we have the polling location and the clerk throwing out 6,000 mail-in ballots. There's a problem here. So I struggle. So Nick Hunter, thank you, Nick. Nick is he said, you spelled regressive wrongly. It's progressive. Thank you, Nick. And we welcome all of our MAGA folks. Join the conversation. We're more than happy to have you here. Maybe we'll learn you a thing or two while you're here. So thank you, Nick, for dropping by. So Andy, I know you had some things that you wanted to talk about before we move on to Colorado elections.
Basically, I just wanted to, I kind of had a segment that I wanted to talk about the current protesting, what's happening, and the conversations that are going around households with the family members and why we think the way we do and how that all occurs. And I think right now it's even happened in my house between my wife and I about how she's, up in arms about, especially, in like places like Atlanta where the Wendy's was burned to the ground, and oh my God, how can they do that? And now all those people are out of a job. I'll remind you that they're out of minimum wage jobs, but and how that narrative feeds into, as far back as the Civil War, when we're talking about property and how property value and the rights of property and the protection of property seems to be more important than the rights of people, and why that happens. And when I'm referring to a podcast that we produced on Macro and Cheese a couple of weeks ago from Rami, I want to say Frimpong, who is the funky academic, and he was talking about why this occurs and why that push was on. And we were talking about the Civil War. And in that time that because the South or the Confederate Army and the Confederates, anybody that identified such, it was very important for them to put an emphasis on importance of property, because in their fight to keep slavery, they considered people of color property, right? They owned Black people. And so that was part of the narrative of trying to, convince people that, well, we need to make property the most important thing in our society. And then that feeds into the narrative of us being able to keep our slaves and keep slavery in, and the whole fight that happened through that time, right? So that when we see pictures in St. Louis of two white lawyers and then, in a albino white neighborhood with semi-automatic weapons standing in front of their homes, trying to look, the gentleman in his pink button down, trying to look menacing, that all feeds into that narrative about, I don't care about your rights. If you touch my property, I'm, potentially going to kill you, right? And that feeds that whole thing. That feeds that whole narrative about how property is more important, and why people are flabbergasted that buildings are getting burned down, or things are being defaced, or statues, Confederate statues are being, defaced and toppled over and destroyed, right? And that these are things, and they have more value than human life, right? Like another part of that whole narrative was that he was talking about looting, and how, people think that the looting is so absolutely horrible. And obviously I'm not promoting looting, but when you look at it, right, you have the actual act of looting, a window gets broken, right? So that window needs to be replaced. Well, the people that are going into the store and doing the looting don't have time to do damage, because they're just trying to get stuff and leave, right? So what they're doing is they're all the stuff that's on these store shelves are being removed, and so the store obviously has insurance, right? Mm-hmm. So any damages to the building or anything stolen is instantly going to be replaced with new stuff, right? That they don't have to pay for, because they have to, as required by law, they have to have insurance. They have to have liability and contents insurance, right? So these things all happen. The manufacturers that make the products get to build more and replace the stuff that was stolen, right? The insurance companies that have to pay the money all just got a huge bailout, right? And then, of course, we pointed back to a time where there was back in the mid to late 90s, how in the city of New York had about one DJ for every square mile of New York City. And then the race riots happened and the looting happened. And then instantly after that, there was 16 DJs, right? So the fact that there's looting is actually just an opportunity for persons of color or whoever's doing the looting to just get stuff that they wouldn't have, access to, like some people say it's looting. Well, this one guy gets a new camera and starts a business taking pictures at weddings or whatever, right? So it's a win-win for a lot of people. And the only person that looks bad is Trump, because he's the one that said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. So there could be, when you think about the fact that we have such a value on things that can be replaced. Mm-hmm. All things can be replaced, but people can't. Right? We start to understand how idiotic it is that we're appalled by a business that's owned by a large corporation that pays their workers minimum wage, that's given Trump hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to be upset by that, and we have to look at the big picture. We have to understand that we're talking about persons of color that have been racially discriminated for 400 years. And if we're going to lose a few buildings because of it, I don't care.
Well, and to your point, I was having this discussion with a very dear friend of mine. I've known her since high school. I wonder if it's a coping mechanism where we focus on the petty and the minute, because she had a valid point. She was looking at the hypocrisy of people who were tearing down Civil War monuments to Confederates, but were reticent to change the names in like Harvard and other places. I'm like, that's an interesting take on the broader scope of things. Well, yes, you may be right in this very narrow view. Let's step back and take a look at what's actually going on, and let's not diffuse the message from the entire group because we have focused on this one small area. Okay, valid point, but like you said, it's prioritizing things in the wrong order. And with that, I want to pivot just a little bit into COVID. So Texas and Florida had tried to accelerate their open because if you're a patriot, you're willing to die for a beer at a bar. So what happened is...
Or a haircut.
Yeah, exactly. So what's going on now in Houston, it was interesting because Texas has started to roll back their opening and ordering shutdowns of bars because they saw the single greatest day total rise exponentially. So if you go out and look at like Florida and Texas, their line kind of goes like this. So Governor Abbott in Texas, who is a Republican, decided, okay, and we even saw a tweet from Mitch McConnell where he's advocating wearing masks and not to shame people for wearing masks. So their entire perspective is changing on the Republican side because they think they're starting to see it. So what happened in Austin was a bunch of MAGA folks decided to stage a Bar Lives Matter protest, BAR, because they were against shutting down bars and they want to keep going. But what's interesting is statistically, this is being reported in the Star down in Texas, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas. The single greatest spike is caused by those under the age of 30. So these are all the young folks who are going out to the bars and kicking it and bringing that back home to friends and family and others. So that's what happened. It wasn't the protesters. It was these people going out trying to party and not wearing masks, not taking proper precautions. And we still have to explain to people why you should wear a damn mask. And it doesn't make any sense that the person who's posting on Facebook who barely got out of high school has more of a valid opinion on wearing masks and why than the person who's gone to school for 12 years has a PhD in virology. It boggles the mind. So so to your point, Andy, circling back here, it's the wrong prioritization of what is actually going on.
Right, and the really the dangerous thing about all of this is the actual the disease where you've got you can be asymptomatic and still be carrying the viral load and spreading it around, and people have no idea, right? And that is up to a 2-week incubation period. So the results that we're seeing now are stuff that happened 2 weeks ago,
Right.
So you can't instantly see the direct results of what's happening, right? So anything that's happened that's showing in numbers happened 2 weeks ago. So if you've been even more active and more open in that 2-week period, then you're not going to see the results of shutting down for another 2 weeks. So your numbers are going to skyrocket. Remember how upset people were when they saw the numbers, and they were talking about 4,000, 4,500 in a single day in the state of Texas, right? Well, Florida said, well, hold my beer.
Right, and did 9,000 in a single day. So that's
right. Well, they're the ones that left the beaches open when everything else was shutting down in March, if we recall. And
well,
why
because
should we
they had
care?
all
Because
that
all those kids were
sunshine.
taking that home to their home states, right?
Right.
So
you had
as
the
long as we're
sunshine
fine.
that was going to kill it, right? So that's why Florida said, well, we're the sunshine state. So yeah, the bleach and sunshine. So okay, so I want to continue on. This is super important, and I want to read to you some information here. So if you're at all on Twitter right now, you will have seen that Seattle police have cleared the Chaz area. This was the approximate 6 square blocks of Seattle that had been taken over by Black Lives Matter protesters. So here's what's interesting, and this is obviously a developing story, but it has been reported that the mayor of Seattle signed the order giving authority to the police department to clear this area at 2 a.m. Here's why. Because the Seattle City Council was siding with free speech and the protesters who had taken over Chaz. So it is alleged that the Seattle mayor decided to hold a special meeting at 2 a.m. And it's unclear what powers she was using to sign this order yet. But at 2 a.m. she signed the order, and Seattle has an Open Meetings Act. So we're looking into this one because what the Open Meetings Act is, before your local, state and local representatives meet, they have to post the announcement, they have to provide public comment, and you have to be aware of it because, contrary to popular belief, you as the taxpayer and citizen, you're in charge. So this is what the Open Meetings Act protects, your participation, so that if your mayor decides to hold a special meeting, even if it's just the mayor and the police chief, you as a public citizen have to be notified that that is happening, and you have to have a time frame allowed to, usually it's 2 or 3 minutes, to provide your direct input to whoever's making the policy. So it looks like that didn't happen. So we're still trying to understand what authority the mayor used to clear this area. So they can use something blanket like threat to public safety or something of that nature. So we're trying to find out exactly what they're citing, because right now they cleared an area where people were exercising their free speech and right to publicly assemble peacefully. So that's a developing story. We'll watch it. From what I gather, I'm speaking to some people who were in the area and have been for some time. They did not know this was coming. Nobody in the public sphere was made aware that this was going to happen. We just see the video coming out now of Seattle police reading off this order from the mayor as they're clearing the streets with riot gear. So there are no reports of injuries so far, but we'll keep up on that particular story. So video is being posted all over Twitter right now, so you can go out and take a look and see what's going on. So,
and who would have thought that the Seattle mayor would be directly related to the St. Louis mayor?
Are they?
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay. I'm like, wait, did I miss something in my homework? So, okay, thank you. Yeah, so
they're only related in corruption.
well, that's a lot of mayors, unfortunately, but what can you do? So yeah, there's that. So then the other thing I want to cover is, okay, let's move on to Colorado elections. So we had interviewed here a very wonderful candidate, Andrew Romanoff, and he did not win. And I am shocked. Colorado, what happened? You had Hickenlooper, who openly said, I would be a sucky candidate for Senate, and he won. He even had ethics charges brought against him, and a number of different things. And okay, so Hickenlooper is now going up against the Republican in the general. And I think my personal belief is that Hickenlooper spent a ton of ads just simply saying, I have never lost an election and I don't plan to start now. So for people who are left-leaning, they took that as a sign of, well, maybe he could win in the general. Okay, maybe. So here's some information that I want to post up here. So here's the results. And I've got two races here because one of them I really want to call your attention to. So Democratic U.S. Senate, we had Hickenlooper winning it over 500,000, but Andrew Romanoff came in. This is for a first-time candidate with low funds. Andrew Romanoff did a phenomenal job. Unfortunately, did not prevail. So I hope that, well, okay, let me take that back. Andrew had served in the state legislature. So here's the problem. You can say that a state legislature former candidate or running for Senate, that he had that bully pulpit, but I guarantee you, if you talk to anybody in any state and ask them who their state representative is, 9 out of 10 can't tell you. So I don't know that that was a big boost for Andrew, but this is another one of those candidates that I hope will consider running again because he had such a strong showing and had a great message behind it. But the other race to here that I want to call your attention to is the Republican House race in District 3. And this was an interesting race to me because Scott Tipton was endorsed by Trump. But you had this Lauren Boebert who won. And Lauren is as MAGA as they come. So she was able to out-MAGA Scott. How did she do it? Well, when you go to her website, it reads like the Sons of Anarchy photo shoot. I mean, she's a delightfully adorable 5 nothing badass. So that's going to appeal to this particular audience, especially in the western part of Colorado. So here's what I found was interesting when I was doing some looking into who this particular candidate is. You know where she got her start, Andy? What prompted her to run for office?
Let me see. The Wall, maybe?
No, Colorado's far from the border. So
oh, I know, but you could still be a fan of The Wall. Right?
And she is. But actually, the person that prompted her to run, Beto O'Rourke.
Oh.
And here's why. She'll explain why. This is from video footage from early 2019. So let me go ahead and put this up here.
White House hopeful Beto O'Rourke making gun confiscation his rally cry on the campaign trail, but one woman is not giving up her firearm so easily.
I am here to say, hell no, you're not. I have 4 children. I'm 5'0", 100 pounds. Cannot really defend myself with a fist. I want to know how you're going to legislate that, because a criminal, by defense, breaks the law. So all you're going to do is restrict law-abiding citizens like myself.
That woman, Lauren Boebert, joins us now live. Lauren, thank you for taking time. What happened? Why did you decide to go confront Beto?
Well, I heard that Beto was coming to my state of Colorado to talk about gun control or maybe gun legislation. And I heard what he had to say about taking away our Second Amendment rights and our firearms. And I really wanted to go down there and just reverse his statement and tell him absolutely not. Because I'm sure that is every gun-owning American's immediate response to his hell yes was an immediate, firm hell no.
And I think that's just a way that we were brought up. I've seriously said that most people that carry guns or walk around with guns are, for the most part, compensating for a small penis. But when you talk about a woman, I don't know where to go with that.
Well, as a woman and a gun owner, you know what? I don't know, because I'm one of those enthusiasts, and I don't really consider it. Okay, let me back up here. I do have one of those pump action shotguns, and that is for security. The rest of them, I enjoy going to the range and putting holes in paper targets. It's something I enjoy doing. However, it's a tool, not an extension of me. So I kind of share your view on the concealed carry or the open carry people. I don't understand that. I have never had that kind of fear walking around where I thought I needed a gun on me, on my person. And where she lives out in Colorado, it's a beautiful area and very, very low crime. And, people would automatically assume, well, that's because it's an open carry. No, it has always been that way. So she actually owns a restaurant with a gun range on it. That's why it's called Shooter's Grill. So this is part of her marketing plan and part of her business model. Makes sense. So it was just a little ironic to me that Beto O'Rourke has now sabotaged 4 Democratic candidates that I can think of. And the effect that he had by politicizing what happened in Aurora that motivated this candidate. And like I said, I'm one of those Americans I was raised overseas. The first gun that I ever handled was a Russian military weapon. And then I married a guy from southern Indiana who was raised around it. So yeah, hunting and, targets, that's pretty much it. But what I find ironic is that somebody like me and other people that are members of the left-leaning gun club, and even my Republican neighbors, we already have suggestions that we have tried to forward to stop school shootings, and nobody in the legislature on the right or the left will listen because they're using this as a wedge issue. So here was Beto, who, if you recall his brief stint running for president, was using this as a wedge issue and ended up having the inadvertent effect of prompting this particular woman to run for office, and she just won. And like I said, she is so far to the right that anything and everything that Trump says, she's going to carry out. So now she is the person who is going to be representing the Republican Party in the November election for District 3 in Colorado.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And I didn't see anyone that Democrats were running. So this is why we need a viable major party that serves working families. Because in these areas, Democrats got nothing. They got nothing. Not only no candidate, but no argument and no viable policy that serves an area like Colorado on the western slopes. So
well, exactly right. And the whole fixing of the DNC primaries or the Democratic primaries by the DNC that has, basically just to dishearten progressives and the Bernie Sanders movement, right? And so where do you go from that? Because the people in those states still do not have a voice, right? We have lunatics, like absolute lunatics, like this woman, right? That she looks young, but I would say that her age is probably higher than her IQ. That are winning because of the rugged individual American exceptionalism, rah, flag song, ooh, most important thing, have a gun in your hand, open carry. That the right to do that is more important than my life or, well, the life of any person of color in my region. So, that it's mind-boggling that in this year that we still have people that believe that horseshit. And it's scary as hell. And there needs to be an outlet. There needs to be an outlet to those people who don't buy the crap, that aren't going there anymore, right? That need to silence these people, right? Sit down and shut the fuck up. Because
wow, you got the
destroying
Canadian
things.
cussing. Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, I've never seen you so passionate, Andy. So you're absolutely right. And this is where we keep falling further and further behind because we don't have the only people who are resisting are just us, and we have no power except together. So this is why we're entering week 5 of the Black Lives Matter protest, because it is symbolic of everything, every broken social contract that we have. And one of the things that I would like to do and start getting some traction on, it's pretty easy to get a ballot initiative on. I'm going to check the dates for November, but definitely for the spring. I want to insist that if you are a publicly elected or appointed official, you are not eligible for public monies to be spent on your health insurance. So while we have people in Congress, I mean, my property taxes alone go to pay for everyone elected in my township, my village, my state, to pay for their health insurance. Goes for my member of Congress as well as members of Congress in other states. So that would drop my property taxes overnight by about anywhere from 10 to 28% just by not having to pay for their health insurance while they're telling us that no, Medicare for all is socialism, while they are actually benefiting from a socialistic setup. So I'm looking at, for here in Illinois, and I'd like to extend this to other states, is a ballot initiative to end public financing of health insurance benefits for elected officials. You pay for it on your dime, we're paying for it on our dime. Maybe.
I think it's only fair.
Yeah,
Right.
maybe that will help change the tune a little bit, especially during a pandemic. So what we did see, there was some good that came out of it. There are 23 states that did not expand Medicaid, not Medicare, Medicaid, to cover poor people and their insurance. Now that Medicaid program is deeply flawed, deeply flawed. For example, here in my county, there are 0 hospitals or doctors that accept Medicaid. So if you qualify here in Illinois, where we did expand it, you have to go into the next county or further away, depending on where you live, could be several counties away. So just because you have Medicaid still doesn't mean access, but it's a tiny step forward. So there are some other states that have expanded Medicaid coverage because there's so many people out of work right now that they recognize the public health risk and just hardship, overwhelming hardship by having no access to health insurance whatsoever.
If you have Medicaid, you actually have to drive so far that by the time you get back, you're healed.
Yeah, or dead. You know,
right? It's like that
whichever.
the old Russian electrician that I used to work with a few years ago that said he was from the Ukraine, and he said that the Russian medical clinic they put the cardiac doctors on the top floor, and there was no elevator in the building. So to go see a heart doctor, you had to walk all the way up the stairs. And if you made it, they turn around and say, "You made it up here. There's nothing wrong with your heart. You can go home."
That's kind of how our healthcare is going now. So, all right. So there's one. We're nearing the end of our program, and there's one more story that I want to cover. Just the surface of it. This is another one of those developing stories, but in light of the Independence holiday coming up, I think that this one is really important, and it's going so under the radar here in the United States that I really think we need to talk about it. So this is the new allegations that the White House and members of the Trump administration were informed over a year ago that Russian agencies were paying Taliban a bounty for every U.S. service member that they killed. So if you think back, we did that here in our country when we were paying people to bring back indigenous Native American scalps. We were paying them X number of dollars per scalps. So turnabout was Russia was trying to pay Taliban, which is ironic because Russia had for many, many years been fighting the same Taliban soldiers in Afghanistan. So now they were like, hey, let's turn up the heat. At the same time, the U.S. was in talks to leave Afghanistan for peace treaties. Russia was allegedly paying Taliban members a bounty. I don't know what the bounty was. We're still unclear of how much it was. But it is very clear that Trump administration staff knew about it. And what's ironic is the Iraqi general that we assassinated, Soleimani, knew about it. So everybody in the global community knew about it. And Soleimani reported it immediately, whereas White House officials did not. So, and we ended up killing.
What a surprise!
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So,
yeah.
So
let's be clear, like that we make sure that people realize when we say bounty, we're not talking about the quicker picker upper.
No, we're talking about
Donald Trump isn't tossing rolls of paper towels into the crowd.
No, this is paying somebody to kill a U.S. service member. So these are your sons and your daughters, your moms and your dads, your brothers and your sisters, everything that we work for to keep them safe while they're risking their lives and doing whatever the hell it is we're doing in Afghanistan. I think protecting the opium crop is what we're doing now. So these are the people that are at risk. So I want to... okay, so I got another video, and this one is Bo from the Fifth Column, and he's wildly popular. He is, he just tells it straight, and I forget where he's from, Indiana. He's kind of got this Indiana, mild Kentucky, Tennessee accent, so he actually did an entire segment on it, and I'll post the link to his particular comment, but his entire segments are pretty short. But I took this piece, and I think that it really, it really talks about, well, how this went down. So I'm going to let him speak. Go ahead, Bo.
But sure, let's suggest for a moment that the failed casino owner, that he had questions and didn't think that the people who do this for a living, that they knew what they were talking about. What was done to verify it? What was done to gather more information on it? If this was just background chatter, it should have launched a massive operation. This is a huge thing. It's not a minor development. This is a big thing. So what was done to verify it? What actions did the administration take? What did they direct the intelligence community or those in the field to do? Nothing. We have no information about anything like that at all. It was ignored. Why? Because the president, the failed casino owner, well, he believes that he can trust Putin. the former Russian intelligence officer. And understand when I say that, if you don't know, Putin's not former Russian intelligence the way that Bush was former CIA. No, Putin was a field officer. He's one of the most distinguished intelligence officers of the 20th century. And Trump, well, Trump has his number because he had somebody ghostwrite a book called The Art of the Deal.
Yeah. So I went out and looked at 2019 how many service members just in Iraq were killed. I did not pull up stats for how many were injured. There were a number of them. But here is a look at, wrong one here. Here is a look at all the service members that died in Afghanistan. So which of these deaths earned a bounty? Who got paid? So you look at all of these people, and these are sons and daughters, right? And first, why are they there? Why have we asked them to be there? Like, the hardest decision that any leader should ever have to make is sending men and women into harm's way. That is the ultimate. And this is why we are supposed to have a strong State Department full of diplomats, because your first line of defense is your diplomatic corps. And I would remind everybody that early on in this administration, you had an unprecedented, never happened before in the history of our country, an unprecedented number of department leadership resign. As soon as they talked to Trump, as soon as he told them what his mission was, they resigned, and most of those posts have not been filled. We had complete scale backs of our embassy staff, of our consulate staff, that has still not been filled. So our first line of defense in all of this is your diplomatic corps. And then when all else fails and it rises to the level of need, you send in men and women of our military. And I feel like their lives have been just treated in a cavalier way that is just so egregious that I cannot believe this particular story. And it's not really making the type of headway that it needs to. And in fact, the administration itself has not denied this. In fact, you've got Bolton, who is, out hawking a book right now, claiming that he himself briefed the president on this bounty program, and they just decided not to do anything about it. So, Andy, I think this goes back to your original point about the wrong prioritization of things over lives. So here, I want people to see these folks. These are the 22 sons and daughters and family members who will never see their family again, while this particular president was more worried about re-election.
Oh, sure, of course,
yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, we understand that, in the market economy, which is the USA, that the military is the employer of last resort, right? And part of the progressive policy in a lot of circles is the federal job guarantee, which can eliminate that, the military being that, right? The federal job guarantee can employ people as the employer of last resort in their own communities, doing good, and not necessarily have to be shot and killed or kill people and come home and suffer lifelong PTSD and potentially have to live in a cardboard box in the street without any help from the government.
Right.
Right.
And this is where I think progressive policy, maybe we're not explaining it well, but you're right. So we have these men and women in these skilled roles. Like, very few people sit around in the military playing cards. And no, you have a job to do. You have learned some skills. And you can bring those back and transition from a military style employer into bringing those skills to your local. And this is where, like, the federal jobs guarantee really gets a bad rap, because my neighbors and I get to decide what work is and what we need here. So I live in an area that has, we struggle with water. My particular town is in a red area, meaning that 20 years from now, there may be no aquifer recharging here, which means, the value of my house is zero because there's no water available. So could we not make work that benefits everyone here from that skilled labor? And I've often talked to people who say, oh, we need to cut the military, but said, okay, here's the cause and effect. 35 states, 35 out of 50 rely on the military for their employer, like I said, the employer of last resort, and those ancillary businesses. So if you cut that budget, what's going to happen down the road? And this is where, to your point, Andy, federal jobs guarantee, and then you've got Medicare for all. So we personally benefit on a local level. We decide, we get those jobs going, and we measure the effectiveness of it. Plus, we are no longer tied to an employer and COBRA health insurance and all of that nightmare. So I think we're just not doing a good job talking about. We're trying, Pavlina, she's everywhere now talking about federal jobs guarantee. So how do we do better? I don't know.
We have to take some of the narrative, right? We don't currently have the ear of the people that do the bulk of the voting, right? Or make the bulk of the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
That has to change. And that's a generational thing too. Right? That can change as, the people that identify as millennials or in that age group get older and start to take over more of the power from the boomer age. And I'm not trying to stereotype anything, but I think that it's pretty clear that there is a generational gap and difference in between, because we look at the progressive candidates that did so well in New York City, and they're not in their 50s.
No, they're really not. And there are a number of our boomers who are woke and understand how macroeconomics works. So obviously, if the shoe does not fit, we're not talking about you, but we're talking about the propensity for our older generation to become more fearful, especially when it comes to retirement assets and value. So they tend to gravitate towards the Republican talking points of me, my, and I, rather than us and we. So yeah, we need to do a much better job. But I just keep going back to the one-on-one conversations with my MAGA neighbors. When you explain to them one-on-one what these policies are, they always come across and say, okay, yeah, I'd support that. Absolutely. But you're right. How do we, like in our context, it's tiny little network. How do we reach other people? And I think that's, getting people to share our content and share content from independent sources. So this is why I personally welcome, Nick and all of his MAGA friends. Come on in. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's okay to not know something, right? It's harder for people to admit that they don't know something. But it's not. We're trying to discuss a subject that most people, like the vast majority of people, not only do they not have any clue, they're not even interested in it because it's such a dry subject, right? But once you start to understand how macroeconomics works and trust me when I say I do, right? I created a podcast for the last 75 weeks. So you tend to pick up a little bit of macroeconomics when that's the subject of your podcast. And the ultimate question that disqualifies you from being an expert in any of this is, well, how are you going to pay for it, right? And as soon as I hear that, I think, oh, well, then let me start your introduction into macroeconomics 101.
That's exactly right. And maybe that's what it is. Just the same kind of viral model. One person talks to one person and you just keep going, keep going. So that's what we need to do. But okay, well this pretty well wraps up everything that we wanted to talk about. Obviously, this is not everything that's going on this week. We will definitely keep you updated on what's going on in Seattle and how that came about, because something doesn't look right. We have never elected emperors here. So how exactly did that mayor get the authority to do what she did? Did she? Or is she just hoping you don't notice? Along with a whole lot of other things going on right here in our country. So happy Canada Day to our neighbors up north.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it. Actually, hanging out with friends safely, because, we actually didn't ignore the pandemic. Looking, just to put my feet up for a little while. I will be returning home on early Friday morning, so that I will be available for the Friday show here. I'm possibly will be unshaven and more than likely hungover.
So hair of the dog will totally fit.
So if you thought I was emotional today, wait for Friday.
Right. Oh,
I'm going to be using the shop floor language that I was accustomed to using as an electrician in an automotive plant. So
excellent. So we'll call it the Andy meltdown.
Headphones.
Very good. Okay, so for everyone here at Progressive Insider and Hair of the Dog, thank you so much for tuning in on your Wednesday when you could have been absolutely anywhere else. And if you're catching this on the replay, thank you. Don't necessarily have to tune in the morning, but we do welcome your comments and questions. And if there are show ideas that you have or somebody that we should interview, let us know. We watch that stuff all the time. So we look forward to your
and
input.
quickly, Carrie, I just wanted to put out a quick plug. If you're interested in macroeconomics, there's two really great books out there that are just, one that's just come out and one that's just in the process of coming out, and that is The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. And has actually spent some time on the New York bestseller, which is amazing for an MMT economist. And the other one, of course, is Pavlina Chenova's book, The Case for a Job Guarantee. And it is equally impressive, and they're both are wonderful reads. They're very easy to get, and they're a really good start to coming to an understanding of why these are progressive ideas and why they're important.
Oh, perfect segue. And in fact, Nick Hanauer had Stephanie on his podcast. I think it was yesterday. So I'm going to see if I can talk to him about letting us post a link to it so that other people can hear her. Because I believe their entire interview was about her book and why she wrote it and what it's about. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And she also did the reading, the audio book, in her own voice. Stephanie Kelton took the time to do her own audio for the book.
Oh,
and
okay.
She's a very eloquent speaker. And there's nobody better to read her book than her, because she's been, a amazing professor at the New School and UMKC and all those different places. And just, she will go back and create all the bridges to all the different parts that people might have heard. And it is absolutely an essential way for us to get the word out. And, the fact that it's on the bestseller book list is important as well. It might get some people that would normally read it. So.
Oh, I love it. I did not know that she did the voiceover. So now I'm definitely going to get the audio version. So, yeah, I'm such a, I'm kind of a nerd. Not only do I watch C-SPAN while I'm doing other things, but an audiobook playing while I'm doing other household tasks. Totally down with it. Absolutely love it, because you're using that time effectively. In my mind, I can be sorting socks and learning about macroeconomics, so I can come back and share it with all of you. I love it. So, okay, thank you, Andy. And we'll post some links to all of that stuff here. No, we do not get commission on any of these things. No, we do not get paid. None of this is paid promotional, although we're open to it.
Yeah, yeah, why?
Exactly. So, all right, with that, we'll get out of here and let you get on with your day. So, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you back here on Friday.
Take care.